Marcus Lee arrived at the airport, his mind focused on the upcoming networking event. As a successful African-American entrepreneur and social activist, he had prepared a compelling speech on inclusion and diversity. He walked towards the boarding gate, mentally rehearsing his key points. At the gate, Marcus presented his boarding pass and ID to the security agent. The agent, without looking up, brusquely informed Marcus that his documentation was incorrect. Confused, Marcus calmly showed his documents again, explaining that everything was in order. The agent, however, continued to insist there was a problem, his voice rising and attracting the attention of nearby passengers. As the situation escalated, Marcus felt a growing sense of humiliation. He could hear whispers about identity issues from other travelers. His friends, who had accompanied him to the airport, shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to intervene. The security agent called for his supervisor, further delaying the process and drawing more unwanted attention. Marcus, maintaining his composure, asked for a clear explanation of the supposed documentation issue. The supervisor arrived, briefly glanced at Marcus's documents, and then engaged in a hushed conversation with the agent. Throughout this ordeal, Marcus noticed other passengers, many of them white, passing through security without incident. The contrast was stark and undeniable. He felt a mix of anger and resignation, recognizing this as yet another instance of racial profiling he had faced in his life. As the delay continued, Marcus saw his chance of making the networking event slipping away. He tried to explain the importance of his trip to the airline staff, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The situation was rapidly turning from an inconvenience into a potential career setback. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the supervisor grudgingly admitted there was no issue with Marcus's documentation. However, the damage was done. Marcus had missed his flight, and the humiliating experience had left him shaken and angry. After being denied boarding, Marcus sat on a bench in the airport, his frustration palpable. He watched as other passengers, many of them white, passed through security and boarded their flights without issue. The stark contrast between their experience and his own treatment filled him with a mix of anger and despair. His friend Daniel, who had witnessed the entire ordeal, sat beside him. "We can't let this slide, Marcus," Daniel said, pulling out his phone. "We need to expose what happened here." Marcus nodded, still processing the events. Together, they decided to use social media to share their experience. They created the hashtag #IdentityAtStake, a direct translation of Identidade em Jogo. Marcus composed a brief but powerful post describing the incident, emphasizing the apparent racial bias in his treatment. As Daniel hit post, they watched the screen anxiously. Within minutes, the post began to gain traction. Notifications flooded in as people shared, commented, and expressed their outrage at Marcus's treatment. Unbeknownst to Marcus, several bystanders had recorded parts of the incident on their phones. These videos started circulating online, providing visual evidence of the discrimination Marcus had faced. The hashtag #IdentityAtStake began trending locally, then nationally. News outlets picked up the story. Marcus's phone rang incessantly with calls from journalists seeking comments. What had begun as a personal humiliation was rapidly transforming into a national conversation about racial profiling and discrimination in air travel. Marcus felt a mix of vindication and apprehension. He was glad the issue was getting attention, but he also realized the spotlight was now on him. As a business owner and activist, he knew this incident could have far-reaching implications for his career and his cause. He turned to Daniel, his expression serious. "This is bigger than just me now," he said. "We need to think carefully about our next steps. This could be an opportunity to drive real change." Daniel nodded in agreement. "You're right, but are you ready for what comes next? This won't be easy." Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. "I have to be ready. Someone needs to take a stand, and it looks like that someone is me." As the hashtag continued to gain momentum, Marcus began to prepare himself for the interviews, discussions, and potential backlash that lay ahead. What had started as a simple business trip had turned into the beginning of a movement, with Marcus at its center. Marcus found himself in a conference room, surrounded by other activists. The air was charged with determination as they discussed how to transform his humiliating experience into meaningful action. As they debated strategies, Marcus realized the fight ahead was far more complex than he had initially imagined. "We need to push for policy changes," one activist argued. "This isn't just about one airline. It's about systemic racism in the entire industry." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just fighting for himself, but for countless others who had faced similar discrimination. As the meeting progressed, Marcus's phone buzzed incessantly. His investors were calling, concerned about the impact of his newfound activism on their business interests. One text message read, "We support you, but please be careful. This could affect our bottom line." The conflict between his professional life and his role as an activist began to gnaw at Marcus. He had worked hard to build his reputation as a successful entrepreneur, and now he felt it slipping away as he became the face of a movement. Later that evening, alone in his apartment, Marcus scrolled through social media. The support was overwhelming, with thousands sharing their own stories of discrimination. Yet, despite the virtual solidarity, Marcus felt increasingly isolated. His phone pinged with a new message. Anonymous, it read, "Back off, or we'll expose everything about your past. You're not as clean as you pretend to be." Marcus's heart raced. He had always been open about his past struggles, but the threat of potential misrepresentation and public scrutiny added a new layer of anxiety to his already complex situation. He looked out his window at the city lights, feeling a deep sense of loneliness. The public saw him as a leader, a symbol of resistance, but they couldn't see the toll it was taking on him personally. Marcus picked up his phone, contemplating whether to call his family or friends for support. But he hesitated, not wanting to burden them with his troubles. The gap between his public persona and private struggles seemed to widen with each passing moment. As he prepared for bed, Marcus steeled himself for the challenges ahead. He knew the path he had chosen would be difficult, but he was determined to see it through, even if it meant facing these moments of doubt and isolation alone. Marcus decided to organize a protest in front of Skyline Airlines headquarters. As he finalized the details, he felt a mix of determination and apprehension. The potential for negative media coverage and public backlash weighed heavily on his mind. On the day of the protest, Marcus arrived early at the designated location. He watched nervously as people began to gather, holding signs and chanting slogans. The crowd grew larger than he had anticipated, with hundreds of supporters joining the cause. "This is incredible," Daniel said, surveying the scene. "You've really struck a chord, Marcus." Marcus nodded, feeling the energy of the crowd. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the small platform they had set up. As he faced the sea of faces, he felt a surge of strength. "We're here today because discrimination has no place in our society," Marcus began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "My experience is not unique. It's a symptom of a larger problem that we must address." As he spoke, Marcus noticed news cameras and reporters on the periphery of the crowd. He knew his words would be scrutinized, but he pressed on, determined to make his message clear. Midway through his speech, Marcus decided to share a personal story. "My grandmother was one of the first African-American flight attendants," he revealed. "She faced barriers and discrimination that we're still fighting today. This isn't just about me or Skyline Airlines. It's about breaking a cycle that has persisted for far too long." The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every word. Marcus could see tears in some people's eyes, and others nodding in agreement. His personal connection to the airline industry added weight to his words, transforming the protest from a reaction to a single incident into a call for systemic change. As Marcus concluded his speech, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. He stepped down from the platform, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The protest had been more powerful than he had dared to hope, but he knew this was just the beginning. Reporters swarmed around him, shouting questions. Marcus took a moment to compose himself before addressing them, aware that his next words could shape the narrative of their movement. The protest had been a success, but the real work of creating lasting change was just beginning. In the wake of the protest, Skyline Airlines found itself in a public relations crisis. The company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting to address the situation. After hours of heated debate, they released a public statement. "Skyline Airlines is committed to diversity and inclusion. We take the recent allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough review of our policies. We will work tirelessly to ensure all passengers feel welcome and respected. Marcus and his team gathered to discuss the airline's response. It's just damage control, Daniel said, shaking his head. They're not addressing the real issues. Marcus agreed. We need to push for concrete actions, not just empty promises. This movement has to go beyond a single protest. As they strategized their next steps, Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications. Celebrities and influencers were starting to speak out in support of their cause. The hashtag identity at stake was trending globally. The increased attention brought new pressures. Marcus received invitations to speak at conferences and appear on talk shows. His inbox filled with messages from people sharing their own experiences of discrimination. Meanwhile, Skyline Airlines was feeling the heat. Their stock price dipped, and customers began boycotting their flights. The company's CEO called another press conference, announcing the formation of a diversity task force and promising to implement new training programs for all staff. Marcus and his team watched the conference with skepticism. They're still not admitting any wrongdoing, one of the activists pointed out. We need to keep the pressure on, Marcus said, but we also need to be ready to engage if they're serious about making changes. As the day wore on, Marcus received word that Skyline's board wanted to meet with him privately. The invitation presented both an opportunity and a risk. What if it's a trap? Daniel worried. They could try to buy your silence or twist your words against you. Marcus considered the possibilities. It's a risk we have to take, he decided. If there's a chance to create real change from within, we need to seize it. As he prepared for the meeting, Marcus knew that the next few hours could determine the future of their movement. The reaction of Skyline Airlines had opened a door, but it was up to Marcus to ensure that it led to genuine transformation rather than a dead end. Marcus received an invitation to appear on a live national news program. Aware of the high stakes, he spent hours preparing, anticipating questions, and rehearsing his responses. On the day of the interview, Marcus arrived at the studio, his stomach in knots. As the makeup artist touched up his face, he could hear the buzz of the studio audience. The gravity of the moment weighed heavily on him. The host, a well-known figure in broadcast journalism, greeted Marcus with a firm handshake. "Ready to tell your story?" he asked, his tone friendly but professional. As the cameras began rolling, Marcus took a deep breath. The host opened with questions about the airport incident, which Marcus answered clearly and concisely. However, as the interview progressed, he noticed a shift in the line of questioning. "Let's talk about your business career," the host said, steering away from the racial issues. "How has this incident affected your company?" Marcus felt a flash of frustration. "While my business is important, the real issue here is systemic racial discrimination," he countered. "That's what we need to focus on." The host, momentarily taken aback, attempted to redirect the conversation again. "But surely your entrepreneurial success is an inspiration to many. Isn't that the real story here?" In a moment of boldness, Marcus decided to take control of the narrative. "With all due respect," he said firmly, "my individual success doesn't negate the broader issue of racial injustice. We can't ignore the countless others who face discrimination daily." A hush fell over the studio. Marcus could see the surprise on the host's face, but he pressed on, laying out specific instances of racial profiling and calling for concrete actions from airlines and lawmakers. As the interview concluded, Marcus felt a mix of anxiety and pride. He had stayed true to his message, refusing to let it be diluted or sidetracked. As he left the studio, his phone buzzed with messages of support from viewers impressed by his unwavering focus on the larger issues at hand. Marcus knew he had taken a risk by challenging the narrative, but he also felt he had seized a crucial opportunity to keep the spotlight on the fight for racial justice. In the days following the interview, Marcus's stance ignited a firestorm of controversy. His refusal to be sidetracked resonated with many, turning him into a symbol of resistance against racial discrimination. However, it also made him a target for those who wanted to maintain the status quo. As Marcus scrolled through his social media, he saw that hashtag identity at stake had evolved into a broader movement. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination, not just in air travel but in various aspects of daily life. Suddenly, a new video surfaced online. It showed a Skyline Airlines crew member verbally abusing another black passenger. The footage quickly went viral, corroborating Marcus's claims and intensifying public outrage. Marcus's phone rang. It was Daniel. "Have you seen the new video?" he asked urgently. "I have," Marcus replied. "This is bigger than we thought. We need to act fast." They quickly organized a conference call with their growing team of activists and legal advisors. The consensus was clear. It was time to take legal action against Skyline Airlines. "We need to file a class action lawsuit," one of the lawyers suggested. "This isn't just about your incident anymore, Marcus. We have evidence of a pattern of discrimination." As they discussed the legal strategy, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility increasing. He was no longer just fighting for himself, but for countless others who had faced similar treatment. The next day, as Marcus prepared to announce their legal action, he received a call from a journalist. "We've uncovered internal emails from Skyline's management," the reporter said. "They show a deliberate policy of profiling certain passengers. We're running the story tonight." Marcus realized the conflict was about to escalate dramatically. The expose would likely bring more scrutiny, both to Skyline and to himself as the face of the movement. As he hung up, Marcus took a deep breath. The fight had grown far beyond what he had initially envisioned, but he knew there was no turning back. With renewed determination, he began to prepare for the legal battle ahead, knowing that the eyes of the nation would be watching. As Marcus prepared for the lawsuit against Skyline Airlines, he delved deeper into the company's history and leadership. While reviewing documents, a familiar name caught his eye: James Thornton, Skyline's current director of operations. Marcus's mind raced back to his high school days. James Thornton had been his rival, a boy who had consistently belittled Marcus for his race and background. The memory of a particular incident surfaced vividly. It was the state speech competition. Marcus had worked tirelessly on his presentation about racial equality. Just before his turn, James approached him. "You don't belong here," he sneered. "Your kind should know your place." Shaken but determined, Marcus delivered his speech. Despite a standing ovation, the judges, all white, awarded him second place. James, who spoke about fiscal responsibility, took first. Now, years later, Marcus realized the depth of the conflict he was facing. This wasn't just about one incident at an airport. It was a continuation of a lifelong struggle against prejudice. Marcus called Daniel immediately. "You won't believe who's involved in this," he said, explaining the connection. Daniel was shocked. "This changes everything. It's not just institutional racism, it's personal." As they discussed the implications, Marcus felt a mix of anger and determination. The lawsuit now had an added dimension. It was a chance to confront not just Skyline's policies, but the very individuals who perpetuated discrimination. However, Marcus also recognized the risk. Exposing this personal connection could be seen as a vendetta, potentially undermining the broader message of their movement. "We need to be strategic about this," Marcus said. "We can't let it become about me versus James. It's still about systemic change." As the legal team prepared their case, Marcus grappled with how to address this personal twist. He knew that the coming days would test not just his resolve, but his ability to balance personal history with the greater good of the cause. The revelation added a new layer of complexity to an already challenging situation, forcing Marcus to confront his past while fighting for the future. The courtroom was packed as the trial against Skyline Airlines began. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, his posture rigid with tension. Across the aisle, James Thornton and the Skyline legal team wore expressions of cool confidence. Over the next few days, witnesses from both sides took the stand. Former Skyline employees testified about unofficial policies of racial profiling, while the defense brought in character witnesses praising the airline's commitment to diversity. Skyline's lawyers attempted to portray Marcus as an attention seeker, using his activist background to question his motives. "Mr. Lee is using this isolated incident to further his own agenda," they argued. Marcus maintained his composure, even as the personal attacks grew more pointed. When it was his turn to testify, he spoke clearly and firmly about his experience, connecting it to the broader issue of systemic racism. The turning point came when the prosecution presented the video of Marcus's original incident at the airport. The courtroom fell silent, as they watched the clear evidence of discriminatory treatment. The jury's reaction was palpable, with several members visibly moved. In his closing argument, Marcus's lawyer emphasized the pattern of discrimination revealed during the trial. "This isn't about one man or one incident," he said. "It's about a systemic problem that must be addressed." As the jury retired to deliberate, Marcus felt a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The wait seemed interminable, stretching over 2 days. Finally, the jury returned. As the verdict was read, Marcus held his breath. "We find in favor of the plaintiff," the foreman announced. A wave of relief washed over Marcus. The court ordered Skyline to pay substantial damages and implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training and policies. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and media, Marcus addressed the crowd. "This victory isn't just for me," he said. "It's for everyone who has ever faced discrimination. But our work isn't over. This is just the beginning of real change." As the crowd cheered, Marcus knew that while this battle was won, the larger fight for equality was far from over. Weeks after the trial, Marcus received an invitation to a prestigious gala honoring activists and changemakers. As he stood at the podium to accept an award for his efforts, he made a decision that would change everything. "I want to thank you all for this honor," Marcus began. "But tonight, I need to reveal something crucial to our ongoing fight for justice." The room fell silent as Marcus continued. "James Thornton, the director of operations at Skyline Airlines, is not just a corporate figurehead. He's a man I've known since high school, a man who once told me I didn't belong because of the color of my skin." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Marcus pressed on, detailing the years of discrimination he'd faced at James's hands, culminating in the recent airport incident. "This isn't just about one airline or one man," Marcus said. "It's about the deeply rooted prejudices that persist in our society, often hidden behind corporate policies and polite smiles." As Marcus spoke, journalists in the audience began furiously taking notes. Within hours, the story broke across major news outlets. The revelation of this personal connection added a new dimension to the case, prompting further investigations into Skyline's hiring practices and corporate culture. In the following days, more employees came forward with stories of discrimination, emboldened by Marcus's disclosure. The mounting pressure forced Skyline's board to take drastic action. James Thornton was fired amid the scandal, and Skyline announced a complete overhaul of its leadership and policies. The company pledged to work with civil rights organizations to address systemic racism within the airline industry. Amidst the whirlwind of media attention and corporate shakeups, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was from a rival airline, offering him a position on their newly formed social justice initiative. As Marcus considered the offer, he realized that his personal ordeal had transformed into a catalyst for industry-wide change. The humiliation he'd faced at the airport had become the spark for a movement much larger than himself. Marcus accepted the position, ready to tackle the challenges ahead. He knew that true change would take time, but for the first time, he felt that the path to equality in the airline industry and beyond was clearer than ever before.